This week on the BackTable podcast.
And Aaron, if I can add one other thing with respect to other places considering hybrid ORs, certainly every institution is different. But I think the key thing is upfront having the communication between all the stakeholders, particularly interventional and surgery. From the very beginning, if you have an understanding of what to expect, then it leaves a lot of that tension out of the developments as they go forward. So having communication up front, having leadership both on the interventional side and on the radiology side that believes in this, that because it truly is the best thing for the patients.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BackTable podcast, your source for all things IR and endovascular. You can find all previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and the BackTable app. This is Aaron Fritz as your host this week, and I'm very excited to introduce our guest today, interventional radiologist Dr. John Racadio and pediatric surgeon Dr. Dan von Allmen, coming to us from Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Aaron. It's great to be here.
Before we dive into our topic today, just want to say a quick word from our sponsor, RadPad. RadPad was developed by physicians for physicians, clinically proven radiation protection during Cine and digital subtraction angiography. Don't bet your career or your health on anything less. Trust RadPad radiation protection shields for all your fluoro-guided interventions. See radpad.com for more information or contact info@radpad.com for a free radiation evaluation and a no-brainer radiation protection cap. And let them know you heard about it on the BackTable podcast. Real quick, John and Dan, actually, do you guys use anything special for radiation protection beyond, the lead aprons and shields, or do you use the RadPad materials in y'all's work?
What we have used in the past are the dosimetry badges that gauge real-time scatter. But that was back in our interventional radiology labs. We have the capability in the hybrid OR that we just opened up recently, but we haven't implemented that yet.
All right, sounds good. Well, yeah, if you're interested, the RadPad protection stuff is helpful, and people are using more of it out there. So let's jump into our topic for today. We're going to be talking about hybrid ORs and when and where they can be implemented to help with collaboration amongst different specialties and also really improve patient care. John and Dan, I just wanted to have you guys introduce yourselves real quick and talk about your practice briefly before we jump into the topic. John, you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. My name is John Racadio, and I am a clinical pediatric interventional radiologist and the director of our interventional radiology research and innovation program, and director of our IR/hybrid OR research lab.
And my name is Dan von Allmen. I am the surgeon-in-chief at Cincinnati Children's Hospital, but am a general pediatric surgeon by training with a career that has focused mainly on pediatric surgical oncology.
Great. And so today, our topic being the hybrid OR, I wanted to first maybe have one, John, if you could just describe what is a hybrid OR for those who aren't familiar. We do have a lot of trainees listening to the podcast. And how did the idea of the hybrid OR come about at Cincinnati Children's?
Well, basically, a hybrid OR is a generic term for an operating room that's equipped with excellent imaging equipment. Traditionally, a state-of-the-art angiographic unit. The idea for the hybrid OR was really a combination of myself and Dan, quite honestly, who shared a common interest in bringing more imaging to the operating room. And Dan, maybe you can comment a little bit about the background as well.
Yeah, I I think that as somebody who has spent a lot of time struggling in the operating room with complex tumors, I really felt that there was an opportunity to combine the expertise and imaging of the radiologist with the surgical skills of a surgeon to actually provide better care for the patient. And so when we talk about our hybrid operating room, as John mentioned, it really is the traditional hybrid OR that has an operating room with imaging equipment in it, primarily set up for fluoroscopy. But we've also taken that a step further, and we feel that it should be all imaging modalities. So we have nice ultrasound equipment and other things in our OR because, the concept is how can we combine the skill set of the radiologist with the surgeon to provide the best care for the patient.
Great. And which, sorry, go ahead, John.
Oh, so one thing, Aaron, just as a little bit more background of how this evolved, in 2002, interventional radiology moved from the radiology department up to the OR area, so a different building and 3 floors up. So there's a conscious effort even in 2002 to move interventional radiology closer to the peri-op environment. So from 2002, that really fostered collaboration between the interventionalists and the surgeons. And this has really culminated in the opening of the hybrid OR, which was opened up about 1.5 years ago.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point, John. And do you guys share like recovery areas and that sort of thing with peri-op?
We share pre-op and recover areas, and they are physically immediately adjacent. The IR suites are immediately adjacent to the operating rooms.
Okay. Yeah, that does make it convenient. And what other kinds of what other subspecialties are using the hybrid OR?
So we've had really broad participation across the surgical subspecialties. And when John and I had this idea and started to implement it, we were specifically interested in not localizing it in one specialty or one type of procedure, but trying to explore the opportunities for any of the surgical subspecialties to benefit from the combination of surgery and radiology. So we have 9 divisions of surgery at the Children's Hospital, including orthopedics and ENT, plastics, urology, general surgery, neurosurgery, and almost all of those divisions have done at least one case in the hybrid OR.
And Aaron, it's even extended beyond the surgical subspecialties. We also have performed cases with our interventional pulmonologists and our interventional gastroenterologists.
Yeah, I saw you guys had sent me some examples of some case, like some tricky lung biopsy cases, and that seemed to be successfully done. Combining IR and pulmonary in that hybrid OR, which looked like they turned out really well. First, I did want to ask you guys if you can give me just maybe a couple examples of particularly challenging cases where the hybrid OR really benefited involving multiple specialties.
Well, Aaron, I think maybe an example of a type of case that has actually just changed our entire workflow is localization of pulmonary nodules for thoracoscopic resection. Okay. So prior to the hybrid OR, we would perform localization under CT guidance down in the radiology department, shuffle the OR staff and the patient from the CT scanner onto the gurney, back up to the OR, get them off the gurney, put them, in decubitus position for thoracoscopy, and then ultimately the surgeons would then perform the thoracoscopy. So now what we do is we've eliminated all those steps. So we bring the patient into the hybrid OR, we place them in the thoracoscopic position, which would allow best access for a resection, and then we'll localize the pulmonary nodule after performing a cone beam CT, and we'll typically leave a Copans breast localization wire right next to the nodule, and then the surgeons can immediately resect it thoracoscopically.
So the advantages of that are many, not the least of which is that certainly it's safer than moving the patient all over the hospital, but also the incredible frustration of sticking the thoracoscope in and finding that the wire has pulled out during all of the transport through the hospital. So we really think that as we get more data, we're going to be able to demonstrate this is substantially better for patient care.
The one thing that's been a common theme amongst the surgeons that I've been able to work with is an increased confidence in the procedure. So, for example, we've performed some tumor resections with our plastic surgeons, our neurosurgeons as well, where the ability to perform an intraoperative CT to look for tumor margins radiographically for large resections such as a skull fibrous dysplasia resection or a tumor invading the maxillary sinus. That's been really invaluable for the surgeon to be able to perform the intraoperative cone beam CT after initial resection. And then when there is residual disease, I'm able to localize that with some of the guidance materials that are part of the hybrid OR. And then they go on for further resection. So increasing confidence in procedures has been a common theme.
Yeah. And what has been the feedback from, staff and patient experiences? These kinds
so from the surgeon's perspective, we push to get people to try it. Once they try it, in general, they think it's wonderful. By and large, everyone has found it incredibly valuable. John talked about that case with the fibrous dysplasia. Very, very helpful to keep that surgeon from finding on a post-op scan that they left tumor in place. Another example of the resource question that you asked, Aaron, is the urologists have used it for stone cases, and typically their protocol suggested that they needed to get a CT scan then post-op at some point, and that scan can be done immediately in the OR and avoids the need for the patient to come back to the hospital for another scan. So those surgeons have found it to be incredibly useful. The orthopedic group has used it for a number of cases, tumor cases and such, and found it very useful. But to be perfectly transparent, they've also had some challenges with the imaging quality, which John could probably speak to better than I.
So, initially on our system, we have a Philips Flex Move FD20 system, and the image quality traditionally for an angiographic unit is really optimized for vascular work. So for orthopedic work, the orthopedic surgeons, their eyes are used to a lot more contrast in the image, in the actual fluoroscopy image. So initially, that was just something new to them, and they they really wanted more contrast. So we worked with our imaging specialists and the Philips team to come out and actually create new protocols or new fluoroscopy protocols that really bring out the contrast to make it more suitable for the orthopedic's eye.
Very cool. And did you guys have any? You mentioned some growing pains with imaging. What about with room design? Was it hard to kind of make sure you designed it so that all the equipment could fit, and logistically, so that when you're changing staff or changing specialties, were there any issues with that sort of thing?
It's a great point, Aaron, and we spent a lot of time before we actually started construction with planning teams from the architects to the imaging people to surgeons from multiple different specialties, as well as the OR staff, to plan this in a way that we felt like when we actually opened it, we will have worked out many of the bugs before they occurred. We went and visited a number of hybrid rooms in the area and really tried to identify what were the characteristics of the room that we wanted. Everything down to boom placement and all the other important things that you don't want to find out when you actually open the room that it doesn't work. So we spent a lot of time before actual construction to put that in place. Once construction took place, we have found really very, very few challenges with regard to the actual outfitting of the room and the way it's designed. We're fortunate to have a very large space, so it's a beautiful room that's got plenty of space for all of the various pieces of equipment in it. And then the other thing that we've done in terms of operationalizing it is to tier the cases that go in there. So a tier 1 case is a case that requires all of the potential technology and people who could offer assistance, including the interventional radiologist, the IR techs, all the bells and whistles really coming together. A tier 2 case is a case that involves surgery and just the radiology techs. Tier 3 case would be the IR docs and the IR techs as an add-on room to the current IR rooms. And then a tier 4 case would just be a general surgery case that's used as an add-on room that doesn't really particularly require the interventional equipment that's in there. So by doing that, we've tried to figure out exactly what resources need to be in place to optimize the use of the room.
Yeah, that's a good point that you raised, because I was going to ask that about, when it's not being used as a quote unquote hybrid OR with, these complex cases, is it just being used as a regular OR in the meantime, or how is it being shared and how is scheduling being done? Is there a priority there, or is it, because that's where conflict can arise, as you guys probably know.
Sure. So we certainly prioritize it for the complex cases that require the capabilities that room offers. If it's not needed for those cases, then we would use it for the other lower priority cases that could be done in any operating room. And at least to date, we haven't had too much trouble in terms of conflict. My hope is actually that as people begin to use it more and more, we'll get to the point where the demand exceeds the supply, but we haven't reached that point yet.
Yeah.
And one thing, Aaron, that also what we've done with respect to reutilization and coordinating cases since we've opened is when we are doing a procedure for the first time, let's say with our neurosurgeons, they're growing pains in position equipment where their staff needs to be. So each time we perform those cases, we learn from that. So then the subsequent cases are already, the room's already set up in that manner. And when possible, what we like to do, we have an excellent program manager for the hybrid OR, Nicole Hilvert. We told her she's one of our really good IR techs, but she now really is in charge of the hybrid OR and does a lot of coordination. We'll actually try to have a walkthrough with members from the respective teams. So let's say we might be doing something with IR, surgery, and also ENT or even pulmonology. We'll get members from each of the teams sometime before the case to do a quick 10-minute walkthrough as far as where they're going to need to be positioned and so forth. And also we have someone from anesthesia involved as well, particularly if we ever need to do a cone beam CT where the position of tubes and lines is very critical to the ability for the C-arm to sweep around the patient. So a lot of pre-planning is been really helpful in making sure these cases go as smoothly as possible.
Dan, you were talking about when you guys were researching, or planning out the hybrid OR in the beginning stages. How did you guys when you were visiting other hybrid ORs? How did you guys decide on the equipment that you chose? And are there many options out there for somebody who's in the process right now? Maybe help guide them. Why you guys decided on the unit that you decided on.
So there are certainly options out there. I think for us, as we looked around at other places, the honest answer is we primarily focused on the type of equipment that we already have, which is the Philips system. John can talk about it a bit more, but we have actually a very unique setup here where we have the same system in the interventional radiology suite, in the operating room, and then in a research lab. And that really affords us the ability to develop procedures in the lab and translate them directly to the clinical care mode, either in the interventional radiology suite or in the operating room.
So, to add on to that, as Dan mentioned, we do have Philips equipment. There are certainly other vendors that are out there to choose from that offers different solutions. But the fact that we have had a longstanding relationship with Philips on the interventional side and the interventional research side, There are some new technologies coming out that we've been working on in the research on the research side, not only with the interventional physicians but the surgeons. As Dan mentioned, we're practicing some techniques and different procedures in the research lab. So when these new technologies are available, we can use them and feel comfortable with them in the clinical hybrid OR.
Yeah, and John, you raised your research lab. I did want to ask you a little bit more for our listeners to tell us about the IR Translational Research and Simulation Lab, because not many places have this, and it's a very interesting things that you guys have at Cincinnati.
Yeah, so about 8 years ago, we opened up a interventional research lab. Because of our relationship that we had with Philips, there was discussion about creating a lab like this where we could test out prototype technologies that Philips was considering implementing on their interventional systems. So the hospital saw the potential benefit of this, and in particular the benefit if we were able to translate some of these new technologies to a hybrid OR, which we had been thinking of, even way back then. So basically, it's a system similar to our interventional systems that we have clinically, as well as our clinical hybrid OR. There are some new technologies where we're looking at incorporating video guidance into the interventional system, which typically Philips is initially planning to implement this with spine surgery, but we're looking at a lot of other more broad applications as well. So the research lab has been a great lab for preclinical research. It's been also a great lab for training, not only our interventional fellows, but training with our surgeons and developing procedures in an atmosphere where there's less stress and there's more ability to be creative.
Mm-hmm. Is it also an animal lab? Are you guys doing procedures on animals, or is it?
The lab is fully capable, and we do a lot of procedures with animals. It's just the reality of the animal model and a lot of the things that we're doing is, I think, really important in simulating what you're going to be up against in a clinical environment.
So we've used small animals, large animals, and cadavers all in the lab to assist with these simulations. So it's really been great.
We've even had some collaborations with other institutions, even collaborations with colleagues from Stockholm at the Karolinska Institute, the Neurovascular Institute. So we look forward to having other multidisciplinary collaborations, not only within our hospital, but with other institutions.
Very cool. So before we wrap things up, there was one thing I wanted to talk to you guys about, and we kind of touched on this a little bit, but I've been talking to some private practice guys about hybrid ORs, and this actually came up at one of the local hospitals in Dallas that I used to work at, where they were in plans to build a hybrid OR, and a lot of several IRs I spoke to were against it because they were worried about competition rather than collaboration. And most of it had to do with scheduling issues, who's gonna have priority and those sorts of things, and that might be more of a private practice mindset. But I was just wanted to get your input and see if you had any words for people out there who are considering it, and ways that it actually can help your patients and your practice rather than hurt it.
Aaron, I think you point out a significant barrier for many people. I think that for a number of reasons, this has been a little bit easier to get started here in Cincinnati. First of all, we're all employees of the hospital, so that takes away some of the financial issues. Doesn't take them completely away, but certainly minimizes them. we also have a very long-standing culture of collaboration. So when we work together, we truly work together on this stuff. But I think your last point is really the most important one, which is, and I tell our junior surgeons in particular this all the time, that you shouldn't focus on you should focus on the patient. And the whole concept here is to figure out how can we treat patients better to get better outcomes with lower morbidity. And that's really the rationale that justifies figuring out how to make this work.
Yeah, no, I mean, I could think of a couple of ways. I used to put the balloon occlusion catheters in for the placenta precreta and accreta cases that went to the OR to then have the child delivered, and then usually they would take the uterus out, but all to prevent intraoperative severe bleeding. And I really hybrid OR would be. So it would have made that case so much safer for the patient rather than having to transport them all over the hospital with bilateral femoral access and balloon occlusion catheters in place. And I once they get to the OR, I don't even know if they're still in place or not. So, stuff like that where it would be immensely helpful. And just another aside is my wife is a pediatric ENT down here at Dallas Children's, and she does a fair number of the J&A cases. And again, they get the preoperative embolization, but they've recently done some also intraoperative embolizations at the time of resection, and she found those immensely helpful. So I could see it where, I think it'll catch on. It's just a matter of time and resources.
And Aaron, if I can add one other thing with respect to other places considering hybrid ORs, certainly every institution is different. But I think the key thing is upfront having the communication between all the stakeholders, particularly interventional and surgery. From the very beginning, if you have an understanding of what to expect, then it leaves a lot of that tension out of the developments as they go forward. So having communication upfront, having leadership both on the interventional side and on the radiology side that believes in this, that because it truly is the best thing for the patients. I think those things are certainly key. One thing that I've noticed is that with regard to image guidance, I think surgeons and interventionalists traditionally don't even speak the same language. Surgeons don't know all of the possibilities that are capable in a hybrid OR, and the interventional radiologists don't know the nuances that the surgeons need for various surgeries. So again, communication between both those groups will allow the best thing to be done for the patients.
Yeah, I think that's a great last point there, John. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add?
Oh, that's great, Aaron. I certainly, as a surgeon, really appreciate the opportunity to participate, and thank you for the opportunity.
Well, thank you, guys. And just to finish up, just wanted to let our listeners know that you can, again, find all our previous episodes of our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, and the BackTable app. Again, thank you to our sponsor, RadPad. And thank you again, John Racadio and Dan von Allmen for coming on. I appreciate it. And everyone take care.
All right. Thank you, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron.